Journey IFC strives to create safe spaces to worship God. Know that you are welcome just as you are, regardless of religious background or lack thereof, skin color, political affiliation, sexuality, age, culture, or any other label you own or society throws on you. You are welcomed and celebrated here just as you are.
Hello, my name's John. I'm a journeyer, trying to hold the mic right up there on my chin. I'm going to do a reading this morning. It comes from Prophet Amos, who spoke of a drought, not of water, but of justice. But first, an editorial comment. I really don't care for this reading at all. It's grim, it's dismal, it is unjourney. So, Pastor's going to have to work on this a little bit. This is woeful. So I'll start it. Woe to you who desires the day of the Lord. Why do you want the day of the Lord? It is darkness, not light, as if someone fled from a lion and was met by a bear, or went into the house and rested a hand against the wall and was bitten by a snake. Is not the day of the Lord darkness, not light, and gloom with no brightness in it? I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the offerings of well-being of your fatted animals I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. But let justice roll down like water and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. And it reminds me of being 8 years old in a Baptist church Wednesday night prayer meeting, and how encouraging that always felt.
That's all I have to say. Follow that one.
John, I wish I could solve the problem of this troubling text, but I'll give it a try. I'll at least say something about it. So you shouldn't like the reading. That's okay. It should make you uncomfortable. That's kind of what prophets do. They make people uncomfortable. And so today's reading, we find our story taking place in a time when Israel is split into two kingdoms. And so there's the north, which is called Israel, which is kind of confusing. And then the south is Judah. So you have North Israel, South Judah. In this split, they even have two separate leaders. So there's Jeroboam and Uzziah. And it seems that the north at this time has more wealth. But they're also, because they're up north more, they're more susceptible to attacks from the Assyrians, who were just a bit further north from them, and they were growing in military power and were pretty dangerous, and history shows that eventually the Assyrians do come and take over Israel in the north. But while they were, bigger and wealthier at this time, it's a very dangerous place in their timeline, but also physically, because a lot of strife is going on. Apart from this physical distance between the north and south, the split is also cultural, and they were seen as completely different people at this time. They had different ways of practicing a similar religion, but they did it in various ways, and they had different leaders, like I said, and they even had different dialects and spoke a little bit differently from one another. So in the book of Amos, which is what we're reading from today, we're told of a prophet who was a messenger of God, who was named, of course, Amos. And he actually comes from the southern region, so in Judah, and he's told to go and speak against Israel in the north. But the thing about Amos is he's not like a lot of other prophets, and he actually refuses the title in the text. He's like, I'm not a prophet, I'm just a farmer. And he says that he has no formal training in prophecy, he has no familial line that he could claim as his way into this, but he knows that God has sent him. Amos is a sheep herder, it tells us, meaning he has some wealth. He's not completely poor. He's from the poor region, but he gets along. And it also says that he has a second job where he kind of prunes back these sycamore fig trees in a way that produces more fruit. But these aren't the figs that we think of. They were more of this sour fruit that were a little bit cheaper, but people, if they could cut it back right and get it to grow, they could make a little bit of money. So all of this is to show that Amos is not this typical prophet, not from this like religious line or anything. He's just a guy who gets this idea from God that he needs to go to the north and speak out. Amos is this kind of man of the land, I like to call him, and he even has to work multiple jobs, which a lot of people living in Austin probably relate to that, to get by, to be able to live. And he has to sell this cheap fruit just to get enough income to live. But he's called by God to speak out against the people up north who seem to have it better than him. So Amos goes north. That's what he does. He goes to Israel and he starts doing what prophets do. You go around and preach God's message as he's heard it from God, at least. And for Amos's case, as John noted, this message is full of a lot of talk about God destroying things, and in particular destroying Israel due to their harmful and unjust practices. If you read more, it's like 9 chapters. If you read it, it's pretty hard. It's a lot of finger wagging. I get what you mean by that, John. But Amos goes and he has to speak these harsh words to Israel, and we've heard some of them that John read, and some of those are I hate, I despise. Really not comfy things to hear from God, right? And while they may not have been in a physical drought, like the series we're talking about is, about drought and rain, they were in this sense of a cultural drought of sorts. Because some people were dying while others were living, and they were dying because there wasn't enough waters of justice, as Amos calls it here. There wasn't enough justice flowing, and they needed that water. And it seemed that these waters have dried up, and this left the poor and the weak vulnerable to these powers that be. Amos came into Israel speaking a different dialect, which immediately marked him as outsider, right? And he had nothing but words of destruction on his lips. So it's like, they probably loved him when he came in, I bet. And I bet a lot of the people heard this man screaming and just kind of like shrugged him off as some crazy Judean. And we probably would do the same thing if we were in this case, because we do this now. We see people who stand on street corners yelling about who is now damned and who's going to hell, and they scream about, what God is telling them and what we need to do to fix us or fix the world. We pass by them because we assume that their message isn't for us, or maybe it doesn't fit our view of God or the world, or maybe it's because it just makes us really uncomfortable. I think that's usually why I kind of avoid that. And I think Amos probably got a lot of similar reactions from the people of his time, too. Who was this outsider farmer boy that was telling them what to do? So while I don't think we need to engage with all of these street prophets, I don't know if all of them are saying things we need to hear. I do think Amos, as this street prophet, had some strong talking points that I think we need to address today. Because what Amos preaches against is really interesting. Amos begins the book by listing all the regions that will fall around Israel, all the nations that will crumble because of their terrible treatment of particular people, especially in regards to their treatment of the people who were poor, who were less than, who were impoverished, the widows, the orphans. But Amos says this destruction won't just land on all these other nations, it's going to fall on Israel too, this so-called people of God, the chosen people. Amos points out that Israel has this special relationship with God of love and connection, and yet they're also joining in with these other nations and harming people that God told them to protect and care for. The widows, the orphans, the poor. And Amos is also bringing this from his own particular struggle with money and power and justice. And Amos probably experienced the harmful practices of the Israelites himself, as he was a farmer from the south. And northern Israel at this time had become comfortable, right? They were now wealthy, and they even were corrupt. They knew how to take advantage of the poor to keep the rich richer. And farmers like Amos were some of the people who were taken advantage of at this time. And as we've seen in current, modern day supply chain issue stuff, it isn't the CEOs who get hurt when supply doesn't meet demand. It's the so-called expendables who lose the little they already have. In times of drought, it's the farmers who lose everything when they're just trying to provide enough crops for everyone to eat. And in times of a recession, like it seems we are entering now, it's those that already have just a little to get by, just scraping by, who seem to get pushed further and further below the poverty line. It's all unjust. A prophet of our more recent history once quoted this story from Amos in a speech that you probably have heard of. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., almost 59 years ago, almost to the day, I think it was August 28th, 59 years ago, he preached his I Have a Dream speech in Washington, D.C. And in this speech, King talks about his dreams for segregation to end, of course, and how he had this dream about children walking hand in hand, regardless of what color their skin was. But ultimately, he's preaching about justice and needing more of it for those who have none, for those who are not in power, those who are the minorities, the people that are thrown off to the side. And then King quotes this text from Amos saying, No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. And while this was 59 years ago, I imagine King could preach these same words to us today, and they would still challenge us. I also think Amos could do the same. I think he could be on any street corner this very morning telling us about those who are hurting, maybe in the heat or in this pandemic, and in this world further driven into division and hate, telling us that we need more water, that we need more justice in our lives. As I sat with Justice this week, I was really struck. You may have heard that one of the people who planned the 9/11 attacks was killed by the U.S. government. You probably saw it on the news or heard the president speak about it. But President Biden said in his remarks about this killing that now justice has been delivered. And it struck me. It kind of shook me to my core. Because I thought, is this really what we think justice looks like? It's death. And those words struck me, and I just thought about, is this what Amos is preaching? Is it really all about destruction? So when Biden said, now justice has been delivered, it just made me wonder, what do we consider justice today? Have we gotten it messed up? And I imagine Amos also wondered what justice looked like himself. He was preaching to a crowd of people who were neglecting the widow, the orphan, the poor, and the powerless. So he might have had some particular talking points in mind that he wanted to change. But I wonder if in all of his talk of destruction, if he too wondered what this justice thing is all about. I wonder if it made him uncomfortable, like Wednesday afternoon, John. Is justice about death and destruction, or is it about something more liberating than both of those? Amos was preaching to a people who were showing up to their religious meetings and singing songs and praying prayers, much like what we're doing today. And all he knew was that God was disgusted with what God saw. God said, I hate your religious festivals. I hate your loud noises, and those offerings, they stink. I don't want to smell any of it. Because while you put on this show for me here, people are dying all around you because of this social order that you have created. And Jesus, in his time, also talked about this messed up social order. And while Jesus used the masculine, patriarchal idea of a kingdom, many modern scholars have taken that word and they've kind of played with it a little bit. And I think they've edited it in a way that better suits what this kingdom is really about. Instead of saying kingdom, we can say God's kingdom, which takes the focus away from this idea of this top-down relationship and into this system when we're all related, we're all kin, we're all worthy, we're all welcome, we're all cared for. The waters of justice should reach everyone, not just the powerful, not just the people we love, not just us. Amos knew what was wrong, and what he had to offer as a solution is that God's kingdom needs a lot more justice. In fact, so much justice that we should all be swimming in a stream of it. Not the kind of justice that calls for more death, but a justice that brings forth the living waters that can heal us all. Because if what we do here today in this faith community does not bring about the waters of justice for the least of these in the kingdom of God, then it seems that it's just a bunch of noise to God. It's all just a distraction from the real work. If what we do doesn't produce waters of justice, we may need to restructure and reconsider some things so that God's kingdom really can come through our work in the world. Prophets like Amos and Martin Luther King Jr. and even Jesus are often hated in their times. Martin Luther King, he was hated, he was killed, and Amos was hated, and Jesus was also hated and killed because they speak profoundly of a God who wants to tear things down because some people are suffering. Prophets make people, and especially people who are comfortable and in power, uncomfortable. And as we know, many prophets get killed for speaking against these oppressive powers that be. But the thing is, their voices and their prophetic words still ring out, reminding us of what Jesus talked about when he said that we should be working for God's kingdom now, here in this moment. We need it to rain, and both physically to cool off the hot summer and to give us some more water for our farmers and crops and to quench this collective thirst I think we're all feeling right now. But we're also in a time when we need it to rain down justice. And not the kind of trickle-down economic system where the rich and powerful get the rain and then they bottle up and they sell it for a profit. No, we need a rain that drenches all of us equally. And I'm going to say, not a rain of destruction, but a rain of new life. Maybe we are all being called to be prophets. Maybe we're called to call down the powerful and lift up those who are struggling around us. Lifting up one another, in fact. But I think our real challenge is to figure out what God is calling us away from. What is God calling us to remove so that these waters of justice may flow? In the words of Martin Luther King Jr., we cannot, we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. May it be so. Amen.
Here we are again, at the end of the first day of the week. Even with a passage like that, know this, there's always been a dream of justice. And all we can promise ourselves and the promise that we get from God is that no matter what, with God's power, we can fight life through. But the greater thing is, at the end of it all, we find out that the dream is true. Go in peace. Amen.